Hi, welcome to RTM 117, Intro to Digital Illustration. This is going to be our first week's lecture, and today I'm going to talk about the two types of graphics, bitmap and vector. We're going to look at just the basic interface of Illustrator and talk about saving, exporting files. Then we're going to look at how to create artboards in Illustrator. Then we'll look briefly at how to import bitmap graphics into Illustrator. Bitmap graphics being photographs to use as reference. So to get us started, I just want to quickly talk about the two types of graphics, bitmap and vector. If you have taken a Photoshop class or have used Photoshop, you have definitely worked with bitmap graphics. And a bitmap graphic is basically a JPEG, a GIF, a Photoshop file. It's an image, basically, that you create in a bitmap program, or it can also be created with a camera. When you shoot photographs, those are always going to be imported as bitmap images, or when you scan something on a scanner, it always scans in as a bitmap image. And a bitmap graphic is a specific type of graphic that uses what's called pixels in a grid. And pixels are these tiny dots of color, and you can kind of see this deer here. This would be the pixel graphic represented, where you see these little dots of information, pixels. And all a pixel is really a dot of color, and that color can be red, green, blue, or gray. And when you get enough of these pixels together, you get a seamless photograph or digital painting. So one of the major downsides to pixels is they are resolution dependent. And that means that the number of pixels in an image determines the quality of the image. And it also determines what size you can view the image and still have it look good, look like it has good resolution. So if you take an image off the web, for example, you've probably all done this, and then you try and blow it up a little bit, it starts to look really disgusting. It's interpolated, which is the definition for trying to upscale an image, and it starts to look blurry, it might look soft, you might see jagged edges. And so it's really important to understand this, because the quality of the image, or the amount of pixels per inch in the image, determine the resolution. So when you're scanning something into Photoshop, you have to pay careful attention to what resolution you scan it at, because once you get it into Photoshop or get it into any computer program, you can't upscale it without this interpolation occurring and a degrading of the quality. So really, that's kind of what a bitmap image is. Bitmap file types include JPEGs, Photoshop documents, GIFs. Those are all really standard bitmap file types that you see all the time on the internet. Specific file types for print that are pixel-based are TIFF files. You might have worked with a TIFF file if you've taken something to a commercial printer. Now, going into vector graphics. Vector graphics are based on mathematical formulas. And what a vector graphic is it's a tiny line or curve. And when you get enough of these lines and curves combined, you create these geometric objects, which are vector graphics. And one of the really great advantages of a vector graphic is that you do not have to worry about resolution. You can scale it to be any size you want it to be, and it'll look crisp and clean and perfect. So that's why logos are created using vector graphics, because sometimes logos have to be really small and sometimes they have to be really large. If I create a graphic that's 1 inch by 1 inch in Illustrator, I can then blow that graphic up to be 50 inches by 50 inches, no problem, and put it on a billboard. One of the downsides to vector graphics, unfortunately, is they are not well supported on the web. So often when you create vector graphics in Illustrator and you're planning on putting them on your website, or having a friend view them, for example, you may have to convert them into a bitmap graphic. And that's an easy process. You can convert vector graphics into bitmap graphics, and then they simply become pixel-based. and then they lose their resolution independence, but that way you can put it on a website, for example, and have it be accessible to people. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions about it, you can ask me during class or you can email me. So moving right along, the next thing I wanted to talk about was just the interface quickly. Illustrator looks a lot like Photoshop. It has a toolbar here. So if you look over on the side, you see all the tools used for creating vector graphics in Illustrator. It has menus at the top. So we have our Illustrator menu, which allows us to customize our Illustrator program. Our preferences, for example, help us do that. We have a file menu. The file menu is really important because it helps us create new documents. It helps us open documents. It allows us to close, save documents. We can save copies of documents. We can save different file formats from this menu. And then we can import bitmap graphics into Illustrator using this menu as well. And we can export vector graphics so that they go into Photoshop as bitmap graphics from this menu. We also set up the document here, so if you wanted to change specific things about the document, like the color mode, for example, this is where you would go to do that. And then finally, really important, this is where we also print from Illustrator. And it's all in the file menu. It's very similar to the Photoshop file menu. The next one we have here is Edit, and Edit's going to do a lot of different things for us in terms of creating our vector graphics, and we'll be talking a lot about the things we can do with the Edit menu. We have our Object menu, which allows us to modify our paths in different ways. When I say the word path, what I'm really referring to is just a small vector element. A path is one of those lines or curves used to create your vector graphic. Then we have a Type menu where we can create font, types, letters, numbers. We have a Select menu where we can select things on our Illustrator interface. We have an Effect menu that allows us to do a lot of cool different effects. We have a View menu, which lets us see everything in different ways. And we have a Window menu, which gives us access to all these specialized windows. And I have some open over here. For example, I have my character palette open. I have a paragraph palette. I have a layers palette. If you've worked in Photoshop, you've probably worked with layers, and we also have layers in Illustrator, so we'll be going over that. And all of these individual palettes are accessible from our window menu. Lastly, we have a help menu, which allows us to search for specific topics online to get some advice on different Illustrator windows, menus, or functions. Okay, so we are going to be going over, within the course of the semester, we're going to be going over a lot of these different functions. But for right now, I just want to kind of get us started. So I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about artboards in Illustrator. Artboards are another really distinguishing feature that is different from Photoshop. In Photoshop, if you've used it, you know that you're kind of constrained to one file. So you create your graphic in Photoshop, or you edit your photograph in Photoshop, and whatever information there is in that image or graphic stops at the edge, and you can't go outside the edge. You're really constrained by the file. In Illustrator, you have what's called an artboard, and it's really like a piece of paper on a much, much larger desk. So you can do things inside of that artboard and have it print, but you can also do things outside of the artboard and have it remain hidden from printing. So I'm just going to scale out for a second. Here's our magnify tool. I'm going to go ahead and click on option here, and I'm going to scale out, and I just wanted to show you our artboard here. This tiny little square is the artboard I've been working in, but we have all this space out here that we can create graphics on and save graphics on, and this space is kind of like empty desk space. It's where we can just put things that we don't want to show up within our artboard. We also have the capability of creating multiple artboards in Illustrator in the same document. So I have another one right here created, and this is a second artboard, and I'm going to show you the tool I used to create this artboard. It's right here in our toolbar. It's called the Artboard tool. And what happens with that artboard tool is if I click on it, I can access the artboard that's currently selected. So if you notice over here, this artboard is selected and I can change it. So if I want to manually scale it, I can do that by just kind of grabbing it and holding down Shift. I just grab the edge with my mouse. I can also hold down Shift if I want it to scale in proportion. Or I can just type in a number up here. Notice you have a width and a height. So my width is 15 inches right now. If I go in here and I type in 5 inches by 5 inches, that's going to significantly change my artboard. And when I hit return here, it becomes a 5-inch by 5-inch artboard. I can actually just kind of grab it too and move it back around within the space here, change its location. I actually have 2 artboards going on here. Okay, so if I want to make another artboard, a separate artboard, I just click on the tool and I can drag and draw out, and then I have a separate artboard altogether. So I have a second artboard here. You can make, I don't know how many the exact number is, but I know you can make, I think, up to 50 or 60, perhaps more artboards in Illustrator. Usually you're never going to make that amount. You probably might have maybe 4 or 5 at the most, but it's really great for when you start working with a document that requires you to print elements separately. A CD cover, for example, a book cover design. The ability to create separate artboards allows you to do everything in one document, and so that's really great. Okay, let's move on. I'm going to go to a different graphic here. I'm just going to click on it. This is a different Illustrator file I'm clicking on. Notice it's at the top here. It's just kind of segued in. So I had my original one here, and then I just clicked on my second one, which is called Bird. And I will put this bird graphic up into the Desire to Learn program for you so that you can have access to it. I'll also put it in materials in our lab so that you can grab it from materials if you want. And the bird graphic is just an illustration. And I wanted to open it up for you so you could kind of see the components of an illustration. And I talked a little bit before about paths. And paths are these lines and curves that create the whole graphic. And an illustration is always made up of a series of paths. And I'm going to go ahead and go to my View menu here. And in View menu, you have the option of going to Outline. And what Outline will do for you is just show you kind of the skeleton of the graphic. So these are all the little paths used to create this graphic. And you notice that if you look at this kind of skeletal document right now, you see that there are actually many different paths used to create this, and then those paths are filled with different colors and gradients. And when I go back to preview here, I'll be able to see the graphic. Now notice you can select paths. I can click, my black arrow up here is called my selection tool. And I also have another arrow next to it called the direct selection tool. So these 2 arrows at the top of your toolbar help you really navigate your paths, because they help you select whole paths and individual components of paths. So my black arrow always lets me select every path in my document or an individual whole path. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and create a path for you just to see. I've created a square here. Now I'm going to use my black arrow. Notice when I click on it, the whole thing gets selected. Now I'm going to go ahead and select just a component of this path. I'm going to grab my direct selection tool here, and if I click in the bird image and just click on one area, you see that the little area where the eye is gets selected. And then, for example, if you notice down here, you have a fill and a stroke. You see the actual color used to fill that particular area. So I'm going to click on a different area here. There's a new fill, that's a different color, different area here, and this is using my direct selection tool. So the direct selection tool lets you click on individual elements within a path, whereas the selection tool allows you to click on the whole path. So direct selection tool for this individual path I created, notice now I can go and grab corners of it, and I can edit it, and I can change it using this tool. So it'll let me select one line or one point on the path, and that's really useful. So two tools you'll be using right away in Illustrator: the direct selection tool and the selection tool. Black arrow, white arrow. Black arrow selects the whole, white arrow selects individual components.